So it's my privilege to introduce the keynote speaker for the final event in this year's Battle Symposium, our former Vice Chairman, General John Hyten, right? So frankly, General Hyten doesn't really need much of an introduction. Like I said, he's the former Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, second senior ranking military officer in our military, which means there is no topic related to U.S. military that General Hyten's not familiar with and has had to provide leadership on that we may have to face. Now, y'all know him as the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I know him as my boss, right? He was, when he was my predecessor as Commander of U.S. Strategic Command, I was his Deputy Commander. I can tell you he's a 1-in-100-year officer. We are happy to have him here today. Long, distinguished career, very varied. You will not find a better expert in strategic deterrence. You will not find a better expert in space, and I could just keep going down the list. There are very few officers of General Hyten's stature who have run a program before inside the Department of Defense. And I would take it all the way, Harvard graduate, and I probably can't get up here without mentioning that. But I would take it all the way back to, believe it or not, General Hyten and I grew up about 15 miles apart, 1 year apart in North Alabama. And so that's where it all started. And so I'm happy to introduce him. He is going to give us some remarks for a period of time. We will have an opportunity, thank you, sir, for allowing it, to take questions and answers. Dr. Potter and I will be moderating that same format as before, chat or with the cards on your seats. But with that, I think join me in anxiously awaiting what General Hyten has to tell us. General, sir.
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, great talking. So good morning, still good morning. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you, Chaz, for the introduction. It was very kind. You know, I really enjoyed this morning. I really did. And thanks to the University of Virginia for putting it on. It's a beautiful building, a beautiful place. And I think it's really important that the university systems in America, especially great universities like Virginia, start taking on the critical topics of today. And one of the most important topics we have is our strategic posture and our strategic deterrent. So thanks very much for taking the time. As I looked at as I listened to the first panel this morning, my remarks that I had prepared had planned to start with the Strategic Posture Commission in 2022. Listening to the first panel this morning, I decided to back it up to July of 2021. And then leaving the second panel, I decided to back it up to April of 2021. So just bear with me for a minute because I think you're going to find it interesting. So during 2020, 2021, I'm the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. A very busy time in our country, a very turbulent time in our country. I can tell you that when I took the job of the Vice Chairman, the things I ended up doing, chairing the COVID task force, dealing with Afghanistan, all the things that I thought I would do is not really what I ended up doing. So it's the most demanding, most busy, crazy job I've ever had and ever will have in my life. So that's just kind of the context. But I came from Strategic Command, and before that I was at Space Command. So I've spent pretty much my entire adult life thinking about strategic topics, strategic deterrence. How to deter our adversaries, studying our adversaries to make sure I understood our adversaries. That's where I've spent. And when I was hired as Vice Chairman, that's where I thought I'd spend my time. So let's go back to April of 2021. April the 14th of 2021, President Biden makes the decision and announces it to the world that the United States will end our longest war and leave Afghanistan. And he gave us the date of September the 11th of 2021. So from that day forward, we're now planning and then executing the withdrawal of our forces from Afghanistan. And that is a very, very difficult, time-consuming job. And now you're focused on tactical things in Afghanistan, trying to figure out how to work those kind of pieces. And then the new Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, heads to the Pacific to do a change of command with two friends of mine, Admiral Phil Davidson giving up command to Admiral Lung Aquilino of the Indo-Pacific Command. And he stands up to give his speech, and he does address Afghanistan, and he does address a number of things. But in that speech, he coins the term integrated deterrence. And so I'm back in the Pentagon, I'm listening to his speech, watch that speech, oh my God, the Secretary of Defense has actually said the word deterrence in a speech. This is amazing. And I get all excited, and I call Greg Weaver and Austin Long and the strategic guys and the Joint Staff right away. Get down to my office, like right now. We're going to put together a thought piece for the Secretary. So as soon as he gets back, I can sit down and I can talk to him about our views of integrated deterrence and what it really means. And so, sure enough, he flies back from the Pacific. The next week, we have a small group meeting, which is the Secretary, the Deputy, the Chairman, and me, and we get together every week just to talk about what's on our mind. It comes to me, guess what's on my mind? Deterrence. Mr. Secretary, oh my gosh, I was so excited hearing in your speech last week in Hawaii when you talked about the concept of integrated deterrence. And so I start going down this brilliant thesis that we had come up with of what integrated deterrence was. And I'm like 2 minutes in, and he goes, John. And as soon as he said that, I knew I was in trouble, because he always calls me Vice or General. Never calls me my first name. And so he goes, John, stop. Yes, sir? You're making this way too complicated. It's just deterrence. And I go, yeah, what? I said, it's just deterrence. The ability to impose cost, the ability to deny benefit, the ability to communicate it to the adversary, it's just deterrence. But it's always got to be integrated, and we're not integrated anything in this government right now, so I used integrated on the front of it. It's that simple. Don't overcomplicate it. So now we just had a 90-minute panel about integrated deterrence. The Department of Defense has written treatises on integrated deterrence. My recommendation, the students listening, the students here in the room, go back and read Schelling and Kahn. If you want to understand integrated deterrence, go back and read Schelling and Kahn. And I think Keith's still here. He's a Kahn fan. I'm more of a Schelling fan. But read on thermonuclear war, read Arms and Influence, read them both. I quote Arms and Influence more just because that's the way my main mind works. But those fundamental documents, written first in the 60s, updated over the years, Thomas Schelling lived well into this century, and he defined the functions of deterrence better than anybody I've ever seen. All the different elements, and you can understand it. And not enough people study and read that today. So go back and read those fundamental documents. And the Secretary of all Defense, sitting there and me, and I'm all excited, puts me back in my seat and reminds me, deterrence is about the basics. It's about the ability to impose cost on an adversary and they can't do anything about it. The ability to deny benefit to that adversary so their objectives are not achieved. And then most importantly, the ability to communicate it credibly to the adversary. That has to come from the whole of government, not just from the Department of Defense. And that's the thing we do worst in this country right now. So I just share that story to kind of set the stage. It's all about deterrence, and deterrence has to be integrated to be effective, and it has to be integrated across the whole of the government. It's that simple. And how integrated deterrence, Becca, has come into the trap of it's a defense concept. I'm sure that the Secretary's not real happy with that. He's probably not happy with me telling that story either. So now let's fast forward to July of 2021. July 2021, think back to what's going on. Early part of July, I forget the exact date, but early part of July, we make the fundamental decision in Afghanistan that ends our experience in Afghanistan because we decide to leave Bagram. The most strategic element, more strategic than Kabul, more strategic than Kandahar, we decide to leave Bagram and turn it over to the Afghan forces. From that moment on, we were out of Afghanistan, basically. The last troops really came out on the 1st of August, leaving a small cadre in the embassy, but we were completely gone. So that's a crazy, crazy month. July 27th, we're going through all this stuff day to day, still doing COVID, still doing all these kind of issues. Phone rings, and it's the DDO, the Deputy Director of Ops, in the National Military Command Center. And when things happen in the world, they call the chairman or the vice chairman. And they called to notify me of a launch. that had just happened in China. That's a little abnormal because most times my notifications for launches, because they happen all the time, just come on an email and I get to them at the end of the day and see what launched. Was an ICBM space launch, who knows what it is. But they called me because the rules for the DDO, the general that's down there, or the admiral that's down there, is anything out of the ordinary, call. And this was out of the ordinary because the launch out of the western part of China went backwards. And that's what the DDO told me. Now, the DDO is not a missile guy, not a rocket guy. So he said it went backwards. That's why he called. What is backwards? So if you're on the Earth's surface and you're trying to launch something into space, you always launch to the east. Why? Because the Earth spins that way. And that means you get the added velocity of the rotation of the Earth as an additional throw to launch an object into space. So you always launch to the east. This went to the west. He didn't understand it, so he picked up the phone and rightly called me. And I'm confused now. And I said, so what is it? I have no idea. What's the intel community say? I asked, I got no idea. All right, well, call me when you know something else. And then you go back to the day-to-day grind and everything's moving on. And about 2 days later, I get the report of what the Chinese had just launched. And to me, it was the most significant launch that had happened during my adult life. Okay, now Sputnik bigger, Apollo bigger, lots of bigger launches have happened, but this was so dramatic. And as an adult, I hadn't experienced something like that. I had to dig into it a little further. And when I dug into it further, I found it was so important that I went running to the chairman, running to the secretary, and say, we need to tell our country and we need to tell the world about this. It's critically important that we tell the world about this. So I retired. My ceremony was November the 19th. Really, one of the last things I got accomplished was approval to release that information to the public. And I did it on CBS on November the 16th. 3 days before I retired. It took me 3 months to get the fact of and what it was released to the world. And then CBS was interested because this had been bouncing around a little bit. People had heard the rumors, heard the ideas. Certain leaks had happened that said something significant had happened. And so David Martin, who I'd had a relationship dating all the way back to 60 Minutes a long time ago, said, I really want you to come on TV tonight. We'll give you the featured piece. We'll give it 2 minutes, and you can tell the American people exactly what it was. Deal. So I get on television. I sit down and David, he says, big things happen. There's a big intro, and all these kind of things are going on. And I said, yep. This summer, the Chinese launched a long-range ballistic missile, a long-range rocket from the western part of China, that launched to the west, went most of the way around the world, then dropped off a hypersonic glide vehicle. The hypersonic glide vehicle then dropped to low altitude and flew all the way back to the target in China and impacted the target in China. He said, how accurate was it? I said, it was close enough. He said, how many times have they tested that? And I said, they've tested that in excess of 200 times. And he goes, how many times have we tested it? And I said, 9. And oh, by the way, none of ours have worked. They've done over 200, and they just demonstrated what was a fractional orbital bombardment system that dropped a hypersonic glide vehicle that could come and attack a target, and nobody can see it coming. The United States can't see it coming. We don't see it coming. It's an unwarned attack. And so we continue to talk about it a little bit. He asked some questions. I know those questions made the security and policy guys that were watching very nervous, but I knew David would ask those questions and I would give the basic answers. And when it was over, he goes, God, that was unbelievable. That's going to create a ruckus in this country like nobody's seen before. And like 3 days later, it had disappeared from the news. That China had developed, the Strategic Posture Commission comes out next. And so we dug out, and we're very careful with our security and policy. I'll just put what we put in the report. This is out of the Posture Commission report. On July 27, 2021, the People's Republic of China conducted a test of an ICBM range hypersonic glide vehicle that traveled 40,000 kilometers. The test likely demonstrated China's technical ability to field a fractional orbital bombardment system that, if fielded, could be intended for a decapitation strike and therefore be highly destabilizing. That's the unclassified version of what's there. And nobody cared. Why did China develop such a weapon? Why did China test such a weapon? It's not because they're worried about the Uyghurs in the West. It's not because they're worried about India and China, because they don't need a 40,000 kilometer weapon in order to do that. That is a first strike weapon against the United States of America. It's the only purpose for it. There is no other purpose. Now, I would like to think they're doing that to get our attention and deter us, which means we have a deterrent problem with them. And we have to think about how do we respond to those kind of things. So 3 days later, it's out of the news. 3 days later is my retirement ceremony. After 40 plus years, I'm finally done. My wife is thrilled beyond belief. We stay in uniform long enough for me to retire. One of my heroes, Tom Moorman, where I got to give the eulogy at his ceremony at Arlington. And then I took the uniform off for the last time. We got in the car, we drove to Colorado, and my wife and I are going to disappear. So the first thing we do is go to Hawaii for a few weeks. Then we go to Australia for, oh gosh, well over a month. We literally have disappeared from the world because we're just tired, just tired. The Joint Staff gave me this watch and a ring to track all my vital signs and everything during my time as the Vice Chairman. The month of August of 2021, I got 58 hours of sleep the entire month. How do you even function like that? And oh, by the way, General Milley got less than me because that was the Afghanistan withdrawal, and it was difficult. So we disappear, and the best part about it is I'm sleeping. Oh, man, am I sleeping. The first night I sleep 9 hours, I wake up and go, oh, that feels pretty good. Next night I sleep 8 hours. Holy cow, this sleep thing. I thought it was overrated. It is not overrated. This is great. And then we disappear to Australia, and I sleep 8 hours a night, and then I take a nap in the afternoon. Holy cow, life is good again. I'm drinking beer, I'm putting on weight, life is good. And we're sitting in a bar in the middle of nowhere on the Great Ocean Road, and my wife's phone rang because I made it so my phone wouldn't ring because I didn't want to talk to anybody. But we had my wife's phone working in case somebody would get hold of us. And I told anybody that I was going to work with in the future, listen, don't call me for 4 months. If you call me in the next 4 months, I'll never talk to you again. And the phone rings, and I look, and my wife holds it up and says, do you want to take it? Because it's a 202 area code. And I'm going, that's not good. And so I answered the phone, and it was Senator Reid and Senator Inhofe calling, and they knew that they were crossing the line, and so they apologized right away, and they said, apologize to Laura right now, I know she's there. So I apologized to my wife, Laura, and they said, look, we have to have names on who's going to be on the Strategic Posture Commission next week. And we want you to be on the commission, but we don't feel like it's fair to put your name in the congressional record unless you're going to agree to actually serve on the commission. And if those two people ask me, I'm pretty much going to do it because we went through difficult times together, and they're both amazing Americans, great senators, and trying to do the right thing for the country. And they told me what they wanted, and I talked to them about them. And the one thing I said, if we do a Strategic Posture Commission, it's not a nuclear posture. It is a strategic posture, and that's what we're going to talk about. And they said, if you're on the commission, you can talk about however you want to take it through. So we talked about who the other people were going to be. Madeleine Creedon ended up being the chair. Senator John Kyle became the vice chair. Many of the people in the room who were in this room, amazing people. So Chaz said, go read this document. Actually, you know the most important thing about this document? This, the cover. America's Strategic Posture. and the 12 names that are here. These 12 names, I'm going to read them out to you. Madeline Creedon, John Kyle, Marshall Billingsley, Gloria Duffy, Rose Gottmiller, Lisa Gordon Haggerty, Rebecca Heinrichs, John Heighton, Robert Schur, Matthew Kronig, Frank Miller, Leonore Tamero. Many of you in this room know those people. From a political standpoint, I don't know how you find a more diverse group of people in the world. Far left, far right, middle, all over the map. And why it's so important is that every word in this document was agreed to by all 12 people. All 12 people. From all spectrums. And you know how we got to fundamental agreement? Starting in July of 2022, which is where I was going to start my remarks, we spent 3 months, basically, after everybody got a clearance, inside a vault, going through the intelligence. And once you've spent 3 months going through the detailed intelligence of what China is doing, what Russia is doing, what Iran is doing, what North Korea is doing, what the rest of the world is doing, and you understand all those pieces, your eyes are wide open. And once your eyes are wide open, the one thing that we all knew, really from the fall of 2022 until we published a year later, was that the one thing we have to do is something. In other words, you can't just sit there and do what we've been doing because it's failing. That's why you see urgency 40-some times in the document. That's why it comes. And oh, by the way, I was on every nuclear posture review dating back to 2009, 2010. And you know the difference between the Strategic Posture Commission and every nuclear posture review? When you show up at the nuclear posture review, you're basically already, the first day you start debating what your nuclear posture is. The first day you start writing draft of what the nuclear posture is going to be. What we did is we spent 3 days going through the detailed intelligence so you understand what it was. And then, even if you don't want to read the details, read the executive summary so you understand what we're saying, but then read the threat that's in this document. Because we actually, to get to write an unclassified document that describes the threat to the United States is unbelievably difficult. And I think one of the most remarkable things we did was write it down in unclassified terms. I just read the little tidbit about China's 40,000 kilometer missile test. But all the stuff that we could get to unclassified, which means we had to take the classified stuff that we learned, go look for unclassified sources, find the unclassified sources, put it in, make sure that we got to there. So you can read the threat and you can understand the threat. And then you can make your own judgment about what we should do. But the one thing I would challenge you, after you read through the threat and the imperative that we put right up front, is to come to the conclusion that what we need to do is just what we've been doing. That'd be fine. No. You may disagree with some of the things we came up with, but we have to do things. So what we came up with was a deterrent structure. And I always get a kick out of watching people, assess and write about what we wrote. Because I can tell you, Lisa's laughing back there, but I mean, we spent 5 minutes one time talking about will versus would. W-I-L-L or W-O-U-L-D. 5 minutes talking about which is the correct word in that document. So we bled over this document, right? So we know that's everything in it. And then you write, people read it and they say, well, it's all about just expanding our nuclear capabilities. Where did you get that? This is about our strategic deterrent. Oh, by the way, we didn't say spend any dollars on new nuclear weapons this year. No, there's actually no recommendation in there about building new nuclear weapons this year. There's no recommendation about new nuclear platforms this year. The recommendation right there is the first and most important thing we need to do on the nuclear side is finish what we're doing and do it right. And oh, by the way, that's going to be extremely challenging because our defense industrial base is in horrible condition. You want to know how horrible it is? I will tell you the story that this just blows me away. Again, history is so insightful if you just take a little time to study it. So 1958, think back to 1958. I wasn't quite there. Some of you in this room were there. Eisenhower's president. Cold War is going. Late 50s, I mean, just think about U-2, spy satellite, all the things that are coming along. U-2 is an amazing story in itself, right? Beginning to end, like 11 months. But the bomber is now going to have a problem because of the air defenses that the Soviet Union has built. So President Eisenhower looks at General Bernard Schriever, who will build the first spy satellite and orbit it, by the way. And he says, I need you to build a long-range missile that within 30 minutes can target anything in the entire Soviet Union, and I need you to deploy it as fast as humanly possible. So that's 1958 in a White House Oval Office meeting. 6 years later, 1964, 6 years later, 1964, there are 800 three-stage solid rocket ICBMs, the Minuteman I, deployed across the middle of America, embedded in hardened cement and iron shelters with fully integrated command and control, linked with 5,000 miles of copper cable under the ground in the middle of America, that can range any target in the Soviet Union accurately and deliver a nuclear weapon. 6 years. Total cost to the government, $2 billion. In current year dollars, that'd be about $18, $19 billion. 2 years. 2009, President Obama gave a speech in Prague, and if you've never listened to that speech, you should go listen to it, because it's the most beautiful nuclear zero speech I think ever put forward and ever given. And he described a future without nuclear weapons. And he thought that the world would follow him. And Russia and China decided to go a different direction. He thought it was so logical, and he put such a powerful statement forward, he thought the world would follow him. So that same president, a Nobel Peace Prize winner, also had to make the decision that we're going to have to modernize our entire nuclear force now because Russia and China are going in a different direction, because his first job as commander-in-chief and to keep us all safe. And he has to do that. And he's the president that hired me to be U.S. Strategic Command. But in that modernization program that started in the early 2010s was the ground-based strategic deterrent, now called Sentinel. Sentinel was projected a 10-year development program, which was way too long, but it was going to cost on the nature of $20 billion for 400 three-stage solid rocket ICBMs to go into the existing infrastructure. That program now will finally deliver in 2031, maybe. Total cost just went over $100 billion for 400 three-stage solid rocket ICBMs. In 1958, we did 800 for $2 billion when there was no such thing as solid rocket fuel. There was no such thing as an inertial navigation system you could put on top of a missile that would guide it halfway around the world. There was no such thing as an engine that would actually power the first stage, second stage, or third stage. They had to invent all of those things. They invented all those things, deliver the capability for an order of magnitude less than we did, in an order of magnitude time less than we did in the 1950s when they had slide rules and no computers. So, you know, one of our biggest concerns on the Posture Commission, and we talk about it, was we need to be urgent, but do we actually have the ability to go fast? So it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg, but we have to go fast, period. And that means we have to invest in our scientists and technologists and engineers and physicists. We have to give them the resources they need in order to do that. And oh, by the way, it's just not Northrop Grumman's fault that this program is going to take 25 years to deliver. It's not Northrop Grumman's fault. Well, partially Northrop Grumman's fault, but it's the Congress's fault because they don't pass a budget on time. And so you can't actually start anything new for years until after the schedule said it should. All that, you're still paying the Martian Army as we go forward. It's the Pentagon's tab because we only, budget 2 years in advance. So you can't even start. the Pentagon, the Congress, the White House. We're all part of the problem. How did General Shriver go so fast? How did Admiral Rickover go so fast, building a nuclear submarine when he had to invent it out of whole cloth and put a nuclear reactor on it? And the nuclear reactor, when he started, was about the size of this building, and when he finished, it fit on a 20-foot submarine. And he did it in 5 years. How did they go so fast? Because the President of the United States looked at them and said, this is important to the country. You're in charge. If you don't do it, I'll find somebody else that will, and you have 5 years, but I'll give you the money you need. And I guarantee you, well, that's an unlimited check. We're never going to get unlimited checks. You know, there's no such thing as an unlimited check if you're done in 2 years. If you're done in 2 years, you stop paying people. If it takes 30 years, you're paying people for 30 years. The key to going fast and is to spend the money now when you need to spend it, and not defer costs, because then you just pay for the marching army. So we talked about the defense industrial base, the need to go fast. And then we talked about all the elements of integrated deterrence, which are whole of government, nukes, space, cyber, conventional. Big issues on conventional, as the panel said earlier. A nuclear conflict is going to most likely evolve out of a conventional conflict. Go back and read Schelling and Kahn again. You'll find it all there. It'll evolve out of that. So what's the best way to avoid a nuclear conflict? To deter the conventional conflict. To deter the conventional conflict, you have to have improved conventional forces. So we talk about what the improved conventional forces would be. We talk about how that structure would go. Now, what about space? You saw the news this week about what Russia's doing in space. I'll just say that we've been watching Russia do that in space a long time. When I was the commander of Space Command, when General Raymond was commander of Space Command, we talked about the Russian threat, and we stated publicly all we could say, which was they're building weapons and putting them in orbit. All right, so when I saw Congressman Turner make the statement, release the intel, I'm going, it's a good idea, release the intel. I don't know specifically what he's talking about, but it's the same thing we had with the FOBs. Why does it take us? Is there any reason why people on this earth shouldn't know that a rocket took off out of Western China, went western around the world and dropped off what's the downside of telling people that? I think we should tell everybody, every rocket we see that goes off the planet anywhere in the world. I don't know why we hold that classified. Is anybody in here surprised that we have the ability to take pictures of the Earth from space? We still classify those pictures. We take really good pictures. Did you know you can change the resolution on a picture? I don't know if you've seen that on your iPhone or not. You can, but somehow that's still classified. We're over-classified in so many ways. We need to normalize the classification. That doesn't mean declassify everything, for gosh sakes. We have to protect our sources and method, protect the people that collect it. We have to do all those kind of pieces, but for gosh sakes, if the only people that don't know about something are American citizens, let's tell them, okay? Because the Russians know about it, the Chinese know about it, the military knows about it. How about the American people? Let's let them know about it too. I think that's a good idea. So what do we say about space? We said, first thing you got to do in space is you need to build a resilient architecture in space. What is resilience, right? Because they were talking about resilience briefly on the last panel. Resilience is a deny benefit piece of deterrence. If you build a resilient architecture that's very difficult to attack, then if the enemy attacks it, they don't achieve their objectives, that's denying them the benefit. It's the same thing. If you build a resilient architecture, and I've had 3 presidents look at me as the commander of Space Command, then the commander of STRATCOM, then the vice chairman of the Joint Chief, and said, you've been saying we're going to build a resilient architecture for the last 10 years. Why aren't you building it? That's a bad question to get from the president, especially when you've been saying it for 10 years and then you're not doing it. Why aren't we doing it? Because the bureaucracy that we built likes to build big, fat, juicy targets. Now we're finally changing and we're moving, but we're slow. Do we have to be slow? Nope, we don't have to be slow. Look at Elon Musk. Look at Jeff Bezos. We don't have to be slow. This country still has the most innovative element that you've ever seen. So we talk about innovation in the report as well. And the other thing that we said, which was unbelievably controversial, but again, it's an unclassified document. You can look it up. And oh, by the way, we said the United States, for our space capabilities, should pursue offensive and defensive space capabilities. Anybody in this room wonder why that's so controversial? Because we said offensive capabilities. Guess what? If somebody puts a weapon in space, and I'll just say, looks like Russia just did, son of a gun, I would sure like to be able to defend myself. And we talk about defense across the board, and we move now into integrated air and missile defense. Oh, I don't think we want to go into integrated air and missile defense. Well, why don't you go to integrated? Somebody's going to shoot at us. I would like to be able to shoot back. Oh, no, that might destabilize the structure. If it's destabilizing the structure, why have Russia and China spent their entire gross national product on integrated air and missile defense over the last 20 years? Again, it's not about the Uyghurs and the Chechen rebels. They're building it for us. I would like to have some defensive capabilities for us. And oh, by the way, there's no way I'm going to defend against their entire nuclear arsenal, either Russia or China. It's impossible. So we don't say that, because that would be crazy. What we do say is we should pursue all kinds of technologies that are out there. As soon as we see something that works, we should pursue and deploy a defense as soon as possible against a coercive missile attack from China, Russia, or anybody else. What is a coercive missile attack? It's defined in the document. A coercive missile attack is just what Putin did at the beginning of the Ukrainian war. He said, hey, if this starts going bad, I'm going to use a small number of nuclear weapons to change the equation on the battlefield. And then even threatened to use a small number of nuclear weapons against the United States of America. And again, nobody pays attention. But you know what? If the small number of nuclear weapons are coming at us, I'd like to be able to shoot them down. I can't shoot down the thousands. That's what our strategic deterrent is all about. But I can shoot down one or two. How about we defend against that and take the coercive threat off the table so we can walk into it? Then we talk about cyber. And oh, by the way, Russia and China and other actors, Iran, North Korea, they're heavily involved in cyber. They're attacking us in cyber every day. They're feeding false information into the media cycle in the United States of America. How about we also, as part of our strategic deterrent, figure out a way to deny that? So we need to have defenses against missiles, against space, against cyber, and conventional. All of those pieces are part of denying the benefit to the adversary of what they're trying to do. And then you pile that on with our nuclear capabilities, which we talk about what we need. And where do we spend all our time in the nuclear capabilities talking about? We say, finish what we got, finish Sentinel, finish the bomber, finish the submarine, finish the weapons, make sure we have enough to do that. And then, for gosh sakes, invest in the critical nuclear infrastructure of this country, because it has fallen apart. If you go into the Department of Energy, if you go into the national labs, Los Alamos, Livermore, Sandia, Oak Ridge, wherever you want to go, you will see collapsing infrastructure. You'll see buildings from the Manhattan Project still there. The United States trails the world in the ability to produce a plutonium pit. North Korea, better than we are. How is that even possible to come out of my mouth in any topic at all? So we need to build that back up. We need to invest in that infrastructure. What do we need to invest it for? We actually say we don't know. But for gosh sakes, if the world doesn't go the way we want to, we better have invested in that infrastructure so we can actually move when we need to. And then we talk about arms control. Why do we talk about arms control? Because arms control is falling apart. Russia has violated every treaty known to man. They're basically out of the New START treaty already. They just violated the Outer Space Treaty. They're out of every treaty there is. There's no arms control treaties in the world. Why would we spend a significant amount of time talking about arms control? Because in the long term, that should be part of the solution. And guess what? If we do the deterrent right, if we create the right kind of deterrent where our enemies experience fear from our side, and oh, by the way, Schelling spends a lot of time in Arms and Influence talking about fear, because fear is a critical element of a deterrent. And when an enemy and an adversary fears you, they're more willing to come to the table and talk about a better world that's in all of our interests. And so that is, in the 27 to 35 time we're looking at, that is a future that is a real possibility. It looks hopeless right now, but it absolutely could be there. But it's not going to be there if we don't create the entire deterrent structure that we go through talking about. So you go back to Secretary Austin, an Army soldier, I knew him at CENTCOM, so he was General Austin to me for a long time. It was hard to learn to call him secretary. Going to give a speech in the Pacific, his first major speech. And what does he choose to address? He's Army soldier, ground pounder, knuckle dragger. He addresses integrated deterrence. Because that is the most important thing we can do as a nation. Because that's how we maintain our security. And, you know, people say, well, how come the United States of America, how come the citizens don't understand that? You know, I actually want to be the citizen of a country where the people wake up in the morning and they go to work and they don't worry about this stuff. They go to bed at night and they sleep like babies. They sleep 8, 9 hours because it's awesome. They wake up the next day, go to work, and they don't think about this stuff. But somebody's got to think about it. Because if we don't, they won't be waking up. They'll be waking up to a different world. They'll be waking up to a world where the United States no longer provides that kind of construct. And I have kids and grandkids now, and they've all moved back to Colorado. They're all within an hour of my house. It's like the greatest thing that's ever happened to my wife and I. Everybody's around, along with 2 grandkids, Henry and Emmy, 3 and 1. And I just want them to grow up in this country, in this world, where they feel safe, where they can decide whatever the heck they want to do. In order for that to happen, good people need to wake up every morning, go to work, and try to figure this out. And the last hook is about Schelling and Kahn. So Thomas Schelling, Herman Kahn. Clearly, they were in the Department of Defense, right? Clearly, they were the strategic thinkers in the White House, right? No. Schelling was Harvard and Yale professor. Kahn was Rand and Hudson, really the founder of Hudson. The great thoughts came out of the universities and the think tanks. The deterrent theory of the 60s came out of the think tanks. And it was so good, we still look at it today. It was still good, we still study it today. And I recommended it to you, but I would hope that there's somebody at this university or at Harvard or Yale or Hudson or Rand that is doing this kind of work. I know Keith's doing it, so it's really not even fair to call him out in this room because he spent his whole life doing it. But we need that mass of intellectual power to be put against this problem so that Henry and Emmy can grow up in this world and not have to worry about this stuff because it's dangerous. So in my prepared remarks, I finished 3 minutes late. I apologize, but you made me back up to 2021, so it's your fault. But thank you very much.
So please send questions up this way. Admiral Richard and I will process them. And while you're getting that organized and they come in from online, let me lead us off, and then perhaps Admiral Richard will follow. You talk a lot about Schelling. I'm also kind of a Schelling fan as opposed to a Kahn fan. Both are pretty good, right?
Sorry, Keith.
But you know, a lot of Schelling, and you're alluding to this kind of throughout your talk, is about willingness to accept risk, right?
Yep.
And the right kind of risk, the willingness to accept escalation, potentially, in order to prevent escalation. But we've got a military and policy apparatus that's often oriented around this sort of dueling orders that don't make much sense. Make it go away, make it better, but don't make it worse, right? What do we do about that in your view? How do we get to a place where we are actually willing to sort of take the scary risks that your talk is implying? Because this stuff, you know, you're talking about, hey, it's a dangerous world, it's a scary world. In a lot of ways, I think the reason people recoil from this is this feeling that, well, hold on, you're talking about making it scarier, right? And you're talking about making it scarier short term for a long-term payoff, which is what these kinds of Schelling-like models are all about. And so I wonder if you could just, given your long thinking on this and your policy experience and everything else, you could just expand on that a little bit.
So that's a perfect question. And just for the record, I didn't ask him to ask that question because I cut a part of my speech out. When I went back to 21, I had to cut something out. So I cut a piece out. That's the answer to that question. So it's genius. I think it's, again, history is very insightful. In the year 2000, I was in the Pentagon as a colonel, and the Pentagon in the year 2000 was in the midst of the quadrennial defense review, the 4-year defense review. And the 2000 quadrennial defense review made a fundamental shift in defense policy that has everything to do with what you just described. And up until the year 2000, and this is 9 years after the Cold War was over, 9 years after the wall came down, 10 years after the wall came down. So it is a different world, and in the speed of the Defense Department, it took us 10 years to figure it out. But we said in the document that the United States of America no longer faces any threats. As the world's lone superpower, we can therefore take our time and build the capabilities that we need to defend ourselves, and we will basically, it was implied, not specifically said, we will lower our risk tolerance and make sure we don't make mistakes. That was in our policy. I find it interesting in history because that's also the year that Vladimir Putin was elected president of Russia. And at almost the same exact time, he made a speech where he was newly inaugurated as the president, and he said, and oh, by the way, my first job is to defend and restore the motherland. The motherland is not the Russian landmass. It's the Soviet Union. It's Ukraine. And he started talking about Ukraine and Lithuania and Estonia and Latvia and the Baltics. And he started talking about all of those elements like he did the other night, which is just, it seems crazy to us. He started talking about that in 2000. And we just didn't listen. And we changed our risk tolerance from, we'll take risks, we'll go fast, we'll take risks, to, no, we can actually take the time now because we don't have any adversaries. 2006, he announced the development of all the nuclear weapons that were coming after us. 2010, in our nuclear posture review, the statement, I'll quote it to you, the statement was, Russia is no longer an adversary of the United States of America. The predecessor was, even though we still have our differences, Russia is no longer an adversary of the United States of America. In 2010, 4 years after they announced the development of all these novel nuclear weapons that are just now coming to fruition. So somehow, even though the development of those nuclear weapons must not have been against us, and we said we can continue to take our time. And then the last piece of this puzzle, where we can change it. Number one, you have to go back to a threat-based view of the world. That was the description of the remarks today. Eyes wide open, a threat-based view of the world, right? That's what we saw on the Strategic Posture Commission. That's what I'm hoping you see today. Open your eyes wide open. Once you understand the threat, and it's a threat-based view, the threat is going to be there a certain amount of time. You only have a certain amount of time to go. You have a different risk tolerance. But we have to move. The policy of the Pentagon is still capabilities-based development. Don't take risk. How do we fall back behind in hypersonics? In 2007, we led the world in hypersonics. We had a scramjet engine that had been built, gosh, almost a decade before. That is the power of it. And DARPA had 2 tests, the Hypersonic Test Vehicle 1 and Hypersonic Test Vehicle 2, HTV-1 and HTV-2. The first one failed. What did the department and Congress do? Stop! 2 years of hearings, investigations, et cetera. Finally figured out what it was. Okay, we'll try again. HTV-2 fails, cancel the program. 2009, program canceled. We were leading the world, and we stopped because we had 2 failures. How many of those failures China had do you think are 200? A lot. One of my favorite paintings in the Pentagon is a picture of a single rocket launching at night, little bitty rocket in dark, and there's nothing on it but a gold plate, and the gold plate says, Discover 13. Why is it my favorite painting? Discover 13 was the first spy satellite that worked. Corona was on top of it. It worked, Discover 13. What happened to Discover 1 through 12? They all blew up or failed, every one of them. But they failed in 18 months. 12 failures in 18 months, and the 13th worked. And in HTV 1 and 2, 4 years of investigation, canceled the program because we had 2 failures. And oh, by the way, those hypersonic vehicles, one of them went halfway across the Pacific before it blew up. And that's really hard technology. So if you're doing something hard, you got to take the risk. But when you have a capabilities-based approach to it and you don't have any threats, take your time. Well, we have threats now, ladies and gentlemen. We need to change our risk tolerance. And then me, as a military officer, when I deployed in the Middle East, the last time was 2006, so a long time ago, I would give orders to, I'll say, staff sergeants, E5s in the Army. They would get down to them. Those orders would allow them, using rules of engagement, to take human lives on a battlefield. To a 26-year-old kid from New Jersey. Full authority, don't have to ask anybody permission, but you have to follow the rules of engagement. I would submit to you that that is a more significant risk than anything that I just talked about. And we'll give it to a 26-year-old staff sergeant and we won't give a 4-star general the ability to make a decision about whether to proceed with the program or not anymore. That's nuts. All right, that's the 5 minutes I got.
Thank you, General.
John, to sort of illustrate this point, and I've heard you before very eloquently speak about getting operational risk back on par with programmatic and technical. Perhaps telling us about B-52 deployment to Greenland might be an example of where we made different decisions in the past about those two types of risk, and it might serve as a model for the future.
So I'm not going to call anybody out in here, but there are people older than you and me in the room, Chaz. So there may be somebody that remembers that day and age, because it's the early 1950s now, 1952. And the classified program was called Operation Blue Jay. Operation Blue Jay was out of Strategic Air Command. The commander at the time was Curtis LeMay. And because of the Soviet nuclear bomber problem, the Soviet nuclear bombers would come over the poles. They'd come over the North Pole, not the poles, but come over the North Pole to attack the United States. And so he realized he needed to build an air base as far north as he could possibly go. So he picked a place called Thule Air Base. They've just renamed it, so I don't remember the new name, but Thule Air Base, 600 miles from the North Pole, right up against the Arctic Circle, actually north of the Arctic Circle, probably 300 or 400 miles, right up against the polar ice cap, and there was a bay. And so he came up with a contract, and the contract specifications were as follows. I needed to build a 10,000-foot runway in this location. I needed to build 2 hangars big enough to handle B-47s and the coming B-52s, and I needed a town for 2,500 people. There's the contract. And oh, by the way, you're up by the North Pole. Kiewit Ceramics actually won the contract, now Kiewit Construction. Guess how long it took them from start to finish to deliver the capability? People say 2 years, 3 years, because you realize the port's, nope, 91 days start to finish. 91 days start to finish. And that runway lasted 60 years on the tundra of the polar ice cap. They had to invent a technology to put a runway on land that moved. And it lasted 60 years. When we had to close down his runway, as he was the commander of Stratcom at Offutt, a 10,000-foot runway, that's a 12,000-foot runway, close enough, had to close it down for a year and a half while they repaired the runway. And they built an entire town and hangars and a runway on tundra in 91 days. So you can't tell me we can't go fast. You just have to hire somebody, let them go, and pay them. Guess what? Kiewit became rich. I have no problem with that. He did it. Now, if he'd have failed, he should be out of business. But he worked, so we'll give him the next contract. That's the way this country should work. So we can get back to it.
So one question here is, in the last year plus, has the U.S. at all improved its ability to detect, react, detect, and it says Chinese hypersonic missiles. We could probably broaden that to hypersonic missiles. Russia has them too.
Yeah, so that's a critically important piece, and the answer is no. So when I was a young officer, we had 2 radars in the south part of the United States, one at Robbins, Georgia, and one at El Dorado, Texas, and the radar faced south. Well, when the wall came down, as we were going forward, and we no longer had a threat, we tore those radars down. So we used to have, we can see hypersonics a little bit from space. We can see a little bit from the north where we have radars, but we can't see anything to the south. And that's because we intentionally created a hole because we had no threat. So do you think the rest of the world knows that we have created a hole? Well, apparently, since they just tested up through the hole, so we can see certain things, certain places, but what they demonstrated is a place where we can't see it.
And another one, kind of broadening this conversation just a little bit, is what concerns do you have related to non-state actors, right? How do those fit into our challenge and deterrent actions?
So the non-state actors create 2 concerns for me. One is about the security of our people, right? We have to protect our citizens, and non-state actors threaten our citizens. So we always have to be aggressively pursuing a non-state actor and understanding what that is. My second concern, though, is the opposite, is that non-state actors distract us from existential threats to our country. Because as bad as 9/11 was, as bad as the terrorist threat is, as bad as, and oh, by the way, remember my first point, we have to defend the citizens of America. No matter how bad they get, they can't threaten our existence. Russia and China can threaten our existence. That should be the first priority. So we have to do both. That's the challenge that we have. And we have the smallest military we've had in my entire lifetime. I mean, the United States Air Force, when I joined, was over twice as big as it is today. The airplanes that we had when I joined were an order of magnitude younger than they are today. Basically, the airplanes that we built my first 10 years in the Air Force, they're all the same airplanes we have today. We haven't modernized at all. The F-35 is now coming online. We're having trouble keeping it flying. We have to move effectively into the world that we face, and it needs to be a threat-based focused. If it's a threat-based focus, then 2 things happen. 1, you develop capabilities to counter the threat, and number 2, you do it at a pace that allows you to defeat the threat. And we can do that as a nation. Go to Silicon Valley, go to Cambridge, go up to Arlington. You will find the most innovative companies in the world. They're just not related to defense.
General, we're starting to run short on time. You mentioned older folks. I want to bring us out in closing to younger. You've had a storied career in leadership. This is a university. You've got access to some of our best students who are lurking around in the back of this room. I wonder if you might say a little bit about where you see their role in what you're describing as essentially a multi-generational project.
So I think it's probably instructive for me to describe just briefly what I'm doing now, besides giving speeches at UABA. So I've chosen to basically work for 3 for-profit companies and then a bunch of nonprofits. But the 3 for-profit companies are 2 space launch companies, Blue Origin and ULA, United Launch Alliance. They're competitors, by the way, and I get to help both of them succeed, which is a fascinating dynamic. Because I get to learn the inner workings of both companies that are competitors, and they trust me to make both of them successful, because guess what? If both of them are successful, the country's better off, and all the leadership understands that. That's amazing. But Jeff Bezos in Blue Origin also allows me to be the executive director for his STEM charity for kids. So I get to travel around the country, meeting young people, trying to encourage young people to enter into science and math, try to encourage young people to enter into the national security business, trying to get young people to understand there's a bigger piece than just making money, that life can be pretty darn good, but you're going to have to study hard. You're going to have to work really hard, and you can do some amazing things. And so Part of my motivation to do that was to try to give back to a country that's given me everything. But what I found, it's like the coolest thing. What I found is they are so much smarter than I am. Oh my gosh, you guys are so much smarter than I was when I was your age. You know, I got to judge a competition at the Marshall Space Flight Center. And I got to sit next to Norm Augenstein. If you don't know who he is, look him up. You know, a legend in our business in so many ways. And we judged a space competition. And the competition was basically your job, starting at 8 in the morning, finishing at 4 in the afternoon, is to design, using the following components, rockets, infrastructure, et cetera, the first phase of the JW Marriott in space. We were staying at Hilton, which I never did understand, but first phase of a JW Marriott in space. And so we had this physicist who was the creator of the problem set, worked for 3 months, and he's been in our business for 40 years. He worked for 3 months coming up with the book answer on the best way to do it. And this group of kids from Edmond, Oklahoma, black, white, Asian, athletes, geeks, who have become best friends over the last 4 years competing in this, in an 8-hour period came up with a better answer than that physicist. And I'm sitting there grading it, and then I'm done grading it, it was clear who the winner was, and I spent 2 hours just walking outside, trying to figure out if I was given that problem, how would I answer it? And I could never get to the answer they came up with. It was genius. So the thing that gives me hope is the next generation is so much better than we were. But we just have to motivate them and not demotivating. So many things that we're doing now are demotivating. We talk about things that aren't important to them. You know, if you talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I point out that, oh, by the way, that's in the Declaration of Independence. That's kind of what we were founded on. All men are created equal. Should have been all people are created equal, but everybody's equal in this country. And when we violate that, it demotivates the generations that we're trying to wake up. Because everybody should be created equal, not one over another, not one above another, not one special group. Everybody should be equal. That's what it's all about in this country. And somehow we miss some of the most fundamental things. But when you let the youth of America run, gosh, it's amazing what they do. So it does give me great hope for the future, for Henry and Emmy.
Thank you, General. We appreciate your comments.